Salutations, Vision of Doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds convene, talk, and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, everyone.
And I am your host, last time one wannabe, the brains for pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I am doing well. Hopefully this will be our last catch-up week for a while. Hopefully.
Yeah, no promises on that. Right. So yeah, not gonna waste much. I mean, it's a weird combination here because it's mostly catch up with like one thing that is of this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we'll get them.
Which brainstormer had to remind me we were doing?
I don't want to get. I want to save that for a surprise. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right. First one is originally from DowningTheComics.com, but due to me having some issues getting to the website itself, I don't think it's on there. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think it's on their end. I think it might have been on mine. But I am using
Brainstormer's computer is a potato, lest we forget. So,
yeah.
archive.org to the rescue, like you do.
Yeah. So, okay. Hold on. See here. Let's go. The Boys showrunner Eric Kripke claims Homelander murdering protester was inspired by Donald Trump. It's written by John F. Trent and published April 25th, 2023. Okay, let me begin with this. Well, with the article, with the title, I suppose. The Boys season 3 came out like a year or so ago, right?
Yes.
And he's just now mentioning this, or just now being covered or something?
Yeah, I didn't get it either. I just knew it was new to this week, and it was worth beating this dead horse one last time. So there's that.
It feels kind of. It just feels like it's.
Maybe he's being interviewed because they're starting the PR for season 4. Maybe. I don't know.
Whatever. Moving on?
Yeah.
The Boys showrunner Eric Kripke, who has made it abundantly clear his show is an allegory of modern day American politics in the past, recently confirmed Homelander murdering a protester in season 3 finale was inspired by President Donald Trump.
Uh-huh. I will give it to Eric Kripke on this. As far as way too on the nose Trump satire / allegories go, this one is probably the least blatant and bitter. So he at least, regardless of how can we please find another topic this might be, it's refreshing to know there's at least one writer in Hollywood that at least knows how to do effective satire still. Instead of, let's pretend the straw man of this character we have in our heads is actually how they act, and then push that satire even further. Derp. Which is 90% of all modern day satire.
Right. Anyway, moving on?
Yeah, moving forward.
To be honest, I want to get to this one as soon as possible because I just don't think we have a lot to say. Because
Right. It's mostly just addressing what Eric said rather than addressing what the article said, because bounding into comics articles are usually somewhere near the mark. There are times where they get a little bit too partisan in the other direction, and I have to gobsmack them for that. But
well,
que
no,
sera sera.
I meant more. I meant more of Crypty's things. I just don't think we're gonna have much to say to be fair.
Well, I forget exactly what he did say, so it'll depend on what
Right.
he says when we get to that part. Anyway, moving forward.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of variety, Crypty was asked about a scene where Homelander induces his son to a rough, 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 Rakoshi. What the fuck is that word? Hold on. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
I'm not. It's weird. I'm very particular about people's grammar, but I have terrible grammar myself.
Uh-huh.
What makes me a hypocrite now? I realize.
Uh-huh. Which, knowing you, sends you in a spiral because that is the one thing you hate above anything.
Okay. Raucous.
Ah, okay. Yeah. It basically means
Harsh.
it basically means bombastic or um wild.
Okay. It's weird to me because these are words I don't think anyone would ever use in like normal sentences.
I mean, ahem.
Yeah, but you are and as you like to so count a wannabe aristocratic intellectual.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not saying there are a lot of people like me in the world. I'm just saying if your claim is that no one speaks this way.
What I meant by no one. Okay, let me define that. What I meant by no one is obviously like the average person.
Yeah, it's not a word people use in their everyday language. Which
Yeah.
honestly, if I may be a snob for like 0.2 seconds here, I feel like our language has gone downhill massively in the previous century or so.
You know what? I don't disagree. I don't
Because
disagree.
like you look at stuff that like George Orwell or uh like Hemingway or people in that sort of same class of writer wrote to each other, and that was just that was a little bit over 80 years ago, and they still spoke way more eloquently in text than we did. And then you go back a little further into like stuff the founders uh, wrote when they were beefing with each other, because the founders like publicly argued with and bantered with each other a lot. They can somehow phrase the worst insults possible in the most poetical terms, and I just feel like I just feel like we've missed something as a species. I know language evolves, I know common parlance, but a century ago the common parlance was a little bit more posh, is all I'm saying.
I think just our intelligence is somewhat dim. No offense.
See, that's the thing. I don't think we've lost intelligence. I think we've just allowed it to go untapped. Because I still maintain, and maybe I'm an optimist here, but I still maintain the average person is smarter than they think they are.
I won't. Okay, you know what? I won't disagree with that. I'm just. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. To be fair.
Yeah, and the average aristocratic cunt is significantly more stupid than they think they are. But that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. Anyway, so back to this.
Yeah, moving on.
Okay, let me restart that. Speaking with Variety, Kripke was asked about a scene where Homelander introduced his son to a
Raucous.
raucous crowd holding signs that read, "Keep America safe, American safety first," and "God's guns and Homelander." They also show him wearing swastikas. I don't want to say that because I feel like that would get me striked,
Mm.
but fuck it. Swastikas and SS bolts. Um, one protester even shoves down a NEC cameraman before Homelander arrives to introduce them to his son.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I have no way of confirming or denying that, so whatever.
I saw it. It's a fair description of the scene.
Okay.
But I didn't see any swastikas, but that might also be the fact that I have optic nerve damage, and so it takes my brain a minute to process visual imagery. But if there were swastikas, then fair enough. There were swastikas. Who cares? Like, for as much as we all would prefer if we left, evil, mustache German dude in the past. You guys do go on about him way more than is warranted. Also, Homelander is not a fascist. To be a fascist, he would have to give a shit about government, and he doesn't give a shit about government. You can be a dictator without ever being a fascist, And even then, I'm not sure Homelander would be a dictator in the most poli-sci sense of that word. He doesn't really have to be. When you are categorically physically superior to people, you don't really. It's the old adage of really scary people don't have to tell you how scary they are. Well, Homelander is vastly enough superior to the average human being that he doesn't exactly have to usually show it. Granted, he does show it more than he probably should because he's a sadistic bastard because of childhood trauma, but that's a different story entirely. Yeah, moving
on. After introducing his son, a protester wearing a blue Starlight shirt yells at Homelander, "Fuck you fascists." The protester then throws a kind of drink that hits Homelander's son. In response, Homelander kills him with his IV. After killing the son, even smirks at the crowd's reaction.
Yeah, because sadly enough, and again, this is the fire you play with when you play the satire card. Because I've explained this before, but I'll go over it again for the sake of the new article. If you satirize something accurately, in a way that is recognizable both to the people criticizing it and to the people who like it, you might end up transferring whatever qualities people like about the original thing you're satirizing into the new thing. If you satirize something disingenuously, i.e., in such a way that only those who criticize a given thing will recognize it, and it's not recognizable to this, it's essentially a straw man of a position rather than an accurate portrayal of a position, then you're not going to get it recognized by the people you're trying to convince. Because in theory, what you want to do with satire is show a slightly exaggerated version of someone else's opinion to them in such a way that it clicks to them and they go, "Oh shit, I didn't realize I was the baddie here." But if you don't if you don't do at least some semblance of representational accuracy with your satire, then either your target guys, hey, you might be the baddies demographic, might not even recognize that's what you're doing, or they might recognize that's what you're doing, but call it a straw man because it effectively is one. This is the danger you have with regards to accurate satire versus inaccurate satire. And you, to your credit, Mr. Kripke, did some accurate satire here. However, because you accurately satirized both the sort of rah, the manga, the manga position, if we could call it that, and the hysterical TDS sufferer position, you accurately portrayed that people who randomly spout off the word fascist without context and apply it to things it does not apply to, and then get violent, are childish, dick-headed morons. And yes, we all know that there was no chance on Earth of Ryan being harmed by the milkshake or whatever was thrown at him. But in some ways, I think you might have accidentally made Homelander more sympathetic there, because that is a father watching some random asshole scream fascist at his son and throw a milkshake. Yeah, no. Yes, Homelander's reaction was extreme and over the top because he's freaking Homelander, but there is a part of that to which your viewer can relate. If you assault someone's son, you are fair game for them to retaliate to, according to most people's ethic anyway. Again, you probably shouldn't kill them because, Homelander is a traumatized sociopath. We know this. But what I'm saying is you think you're portraying that protester as having the high ground because he's spouting fascist and throwing a milkshake or a drink or something at someone he considers to be a fascist. But number one, Homelander's not a fascist. He's just an authoritarian, and even then, not necessarily in the socio-political sense. And two, by accurately portraying the person who randomly spouts fascist at people and then gets violent, you basically kind of made Homelander look like the sympathetic one because all he did was, in an over-the-top, exaggerated way, defend his son. Yeah, so that's why people don't immediately go, "Oh, how horrible is Homelander?" in this one instance. Instead of Homelander's bad qualities being transferred onto Trump, which is what I think you wanted with this satire, you wound up translating some of the positive qualities of Trump, or at least the positive qualities that his fan base associate with him, onto Homelander. And thereby kind of made Homelander look, if not the good guy, at least reasonable in that instance, to some degree. Moving on.
Right, okay. Keep in mind, I was only the first paragraph on.
Sorry. Go ahead. I may have jumped the gun and knocked out like 3 points here, but yeah.
Did I already say after killing the protest, the crowd erupts and Yeah, I did.
Yes,
okay.
You did.
Okay, sorry. Got to move it down. Kripke commented on the scene revealing his inspiration was from Donald Trump. It's not great. It's just a notion taken to the extreme that the more horrible public leaders act, the more fans they seem to rack up. And there's always the expression that Trump can shoot a guy on Fifth Avenue and won't lose any fans. And so we said, let's do that. Except some have Homelander kill a guy on Fifth Avenue and see what the reaction is.
Okay, see, Mr. Kripke, this is where your own skill as a writer got in your way here. Because, once again, to your credit, you didn't do the cartoonish, over-the-top straw man type of satire that something like Velma would do, or something like She-Hulk would do. You actually put in the effort to make a somewhat accurate and three-dimensional form of satire. And in so doing, because you gave a three-dimensional, well-rounded satire, instead of a over-the-top straw man satire, as so many bad satirists do, you actually created a situation where Homelander, at least marginally, looks sympathetic. Because, and again, I want to give credit where it's due. You did this well. This is a good thing that you did, that I am now going to explain to you why it kind of fucks up your point here. Because you accurately portrayed, to some degree, the populist rhetoric of Trump and people's responses to it, and also the opposition to Trump, namely the over-the-top pseudo-intellectual swill screaming fascist that things fascist doesn't apply to, you actually left it open to make Homelander look slightly more sympathetic, because some random punter ran up to him screaming fascist and hit his kid. And Homelander, like basically any good parent, saw someone hurting their kid, even in the minorest way, and also in a public way. I would remind you, this is being broadcast to Homelander's fans and also the media. Someone publicly threw something at his son. Now Homelander overreacted because he's frickin' Homelander, but the rationale behind his actions of, you hit my kid, you crazy fascist screaming punter, that's not an unreasonable, that's not something that your audience can't relate to. Especially lately, because there are a lot of protesters who erroneously scream fascist at anything they don't like and then get violent. It's actually even interesting that you chose to have the guy throw a drink cup, which may or may not have contained a milkshake, because back in 2017 or so, there was actually a brief period where social justice oriented or anti-fascist quote unquote protesters would throw milkshakes at people they didn't like. So even that, if you did that based on research, then kudos to you for doing your homework. That's more than most satirists do these days. But if you did that just at random, even that is not something unfamiliar to your average Joe Blow off the street, because we've seen the various Antifa riots on TV, and we've also seen the media try to overtly cover for them on the grounds that anything that calls itself, however erroneously, anti-fascist must be a good thing, and anything they must be screaming at must be fascist, even if it's the furthest thing from it in terms of definitions or in terms of self-ID. Anyway, moving on.
He elaborated, it's like that campaign video of the guy actively saying he's going to hunt down people with his semi-automatic and kicking open private residence to hunt them down, and people cheer for that. So for us, it was just having not that far off from what could actually happen. What the fuck is he talking?
Yeah, I don't know to what he is referring, but something I do know about that happened around the same time as the thing I think you're referring to is a guy by the name of Beto O'Rourke, who was a Democratic candidate for president back in 2020, saying, yes, we are coming for your AR-15s. So, at best, this, or rather at worst, this is equal in terms of rhetoric. Especially because I want to say that the incident to which you're referring is being said in the context of self-defense, i.e., if you attack me, or if you come for my home, then I will shoot you with my AR-15. Which, again, not an unreasonable standard. That's the standard of self-defense. Now, does it go too far sometimes? Does the castle doctrine in particular sometimes create moral gray areas that are squeaky and makes you think twice about this, sure. But once again, you're trying to create some kind of moral equivalency, and actually not even a moral equivalency, between someone saying something to the effect of, I will defend myself, and the guy who is over the top screaming fascist about the guy saying they will defend themselves. It's just like with the scene we just went through, the scene we just described there. Yeah, you wanted everyone to look at that and see Homelander as some kind of over the top monster, more so than he was previously, which getting people to see that Homelander's a monster, not that hard, or at least it was a lot less hard before you gave Homelander a bunch of sympathetic qualities that you appended to him based on satirizing Trump. But you wanted us to think he's more of a monster because he defended his son from getting hit by some random, probably insane protester screaming fascist for no reason, and throwing a beverage, which I'm just gonna, for the sake of the meme, call a milkshake because I remember when that happened. Yet no, people who attack other people's kids on live TV definitely have some kind of retribution coming to him. Now, again, it's over the top because it's The Boys and it's dark and cynical and it's Homelander. But again, there is a underlying rationale here where Homelander isn't exactly in the wrong, and the guy opposing Homelander is actually kind of in the wrong. So, yeah, you think you made a point about, oh, people can do crazy things and they'll get away with it. But what you actually did was create a three-dimensional story where some crazy guy tosses a milkshake at someone's kid on live TV, and then said character defends his son. More than he should have, but it's still there. It's ironic to me that you don't even seem to realize the difference between your style of satire that is three-dimensional and someone else's variety of satire, the Velma style of satire or the She-Hulk style of satire, that is so over the top and moralistic that it comes off as bitter and cynical. Which is weird because it's almost like you are good despite yourself. You're pulling a little bit of an Alan Moore here. Your talent is actually saving your ass more than your conscious intent would. It's funny how that often works. Moving on.
Homelander's son Ryan, and then Ryan is a really important piece of the story because he's half Becca, half Homelander. If Butcher can figure out how to get his shit together and get the kid back, that would be the single best weapon they have against Homelander. But vice versa, if Homelander wins the kid over, that's apocalyptic because they make two Homelanders. It's like a child's drama with apocalyptic stakes. Like Kramer versus Kramer in Avengers Endgame. So that will be a really rich story moving forward.
I mean, like, okay, I know Homelander's a crazy fucker, and he has threatened several times to go apocalyptic, but as yet he hasn't. And at the moment, the main thing that drives him is the desire for belonging and the desire to be loved. If he can get that without going crazy fuck off nuclear, there's no reason to think that he and Ryan would be any more dangerous than Homelander was, circa season 1 or season 2, which is still dangerous, mind you, but there's no reason to think it's going to go, there's no reason to think they're going to go, let's just destroy everyone today. Especially if Homelander has a solid organic fan base that, in his own words, loves him for him. Because that's the other thing. one of the reasons why Homelander in season 1 and season 2 was such a crazy fucker is because he hated having to constantly put up this mask that wasn't like what he was actually like in order to get people's affection. It created a dissonance within him that made him miserable, and when he got miserable, he got angry, and when he got angry, he was crazy. But now, he's in a place where he can actually be loved for who he actually is, or at least liked and admired for who he actually is in the same celebrity fashion as he was before. Which means he's happier and more stable at the moment. Now, mind you, I agree with Stan Edgar when he says that eventually the other shoe is going to drop and everyone is going to see him for who he is, and that's not going to go well. But even then, if Homelander is concerning himself with being a good father, or at least the father he wishes he would have, there's no reason to assume that he would get angry enough to go apocalyptic, especially now that he has Ryan. So, again, Homelander is a bad guy, Homelander is terrible, Homelander is, a violent sociopath, etc., etc. But there's no reason to think that violent sociopathy is going to result in apocalyptic levels of violence, especially if he has Ryan. Because he might just find the sense of belonging that he's missing in the context of being a father. That's why what Soldier Boy said to Homelander in season 3 was kind of heartbreaking. Not only because it was exactly what Soldier Boy's own father had said to him when he got back from the Vought experiments the first time, but also because Homelander offered, essentially, why can't the three of us just be a happy family and you can help me raise your grandson? And Soldier Boy completely rebuffed him. And it went down horribly. Now, mind you, given the fact that Butcher is basically the closest thing Homelander has to a friend, I think that if those two buried the hatchet, they could raise Ryan together, and it probably would turn out pretty well. And also, Homelander having a friend that he actually respects, perhaps even more so than Black Noir, might help him cool off a little bit. Because as crazy as he is, I don't believe he's entirely too far gone. I don't think he's so crazy that he couldn't possibly soften his ways. Now, mind you, there are things he has done that make my blood boil and make me glad that he does not exist, like what he did to Blind Spot, because I can't help but think how he would react to me. But that being said, perhaps if he got a healthier support system, and perhaps if he was cared about as a person rather than just as a celebrity or a living weapon, he could soften up that mindset, and maybe that shit wouldn't happen as often anymore or at all. But, oh wait, we can't be sympathetic to Homelander or hope that he finds a positive way out of this because we're just as cynical as the Boys universe after all. Derp. Anyway, moving on.
Hello, Ahsoka Tano Gaming.
Hello, Ahsoka.
Let's be honest here, doesn't Butcher want to kill Homelander? He is supposed to be the villain.
I mean, yes, but that's why I phrased it in the sense of if they could manage to bury the hatchet. Because this is the thing, especially in season 3, they acted like the closest thing the other has to a friend a lot. And I think that if they could find some way to bury the hatchet over Ryan, i.e., instead of pulling Ryan, basically using Ryan as a human tug of war piece, and being like, okay, so we both care about the kid, and we both want to see what's best for the kid, and yada yada yada, and he'd probably benefit from both of us being in his life. So why don't we bury the hatchet and at least try to be friends for the sake of the kid? Once that happened, and once Butcher was allowed to grieve the loss of his wife, I could actually see them being a fairly stable friendship. Obviously, I would never have it go to I would never have it be a couple's situation, but I could essentially see them sharing custody of Ryan and thereby allowing Ryan to even himself out, which would also be healthy for Homelander and Butcher because, let's face it, they're both a little bit fucked in the head.
Anyway, moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Kripke didn't stop at Donald Trump references. He also indicated that Robert Singer and Victoria Newman's presidential ticket is an allegory to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. When asked how Butcher will try and win Ryan over while also plotting to kill Newman, Kripke said, "Yeah, it's probably going to be a slam dunk. The Republicans said DeSantis tickets. That's part of the fun of getting into season 4, which we're just figuring out for this. But he's got a crazy ticking clock. He's got so much to do that he hasn't done, and everything that he's trying to do up to this point has exploded in the most horrible way."
I mean, sure, Ahsoka. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen. I'm just saying that the probably soon to ensue apocalyptic ending was at least avoidable. Like, there were ways they could have wound up having a happier ending, and it wouldn't be terrible. Also, here's the thing about Homelander being, quote, the villain, unquote. In this show, in this universe, with it being as dark and cynical as it is, I don't think there are heroes. That's the sad part. I don't think there are good guys in the Boys universe. There are just varying degrees of bad. Which is why I'm fairly certain that Homelander, in the right circumstances, could be a less degree of bad. He could actually, at the very least, become something more approximating his public image circa season 1. If circumstances went well. And I think if he and Butcher buried the hatchet so he could have a friend he respects, and also if he and Butcher could find common ground over raising Ryan, it wouldn't be a sunshine and rainbows happy ending, but it certainly would be a positive ending. And I don't need for Homelander to suffer some kind of horrifying tragic ending, even after all the shit he's done. As usual, my stance on such things is, once you stop doing the bad thing, I don't give a fuck. I don't care about retribution or punishment. I just would rather the bad thing not happen. After that, then I extend basic humanity to you, and you can seek as happy of an ending as you can make for yourself.
Do I need to reread everything I
said? No, or maybe. Go ahead.
I read 2 paragraphs.
Oh, the DeSantis thing. I don't really have any opinions on the DeSantis thing. I do think it's interesting that Eric Kripke is assuming that 2024 is going to be a DeSantis ticket rather than Trump redemption ticket, because not even Ron DeSantis has indicated that he's running yet. So, this is completely off topic into actual real world politics and shit, but it seems like everyone and their mother in the establishment assumes that DeSantis is going to run, but nobody actually seems to have consulted DeSantis on that. Like, the only people rooting for a DeSantis presidency or a DeSantis campaign even are the people who hate DeSantis, they just hate Trump more. And I find it interesting that DeSantis might make the smart move and sit 2024 out, allowing Trump to retake the presidency so that he can then be the heir apparent in 2028 and catch a lot of positive feelings from MAGA for not trying to upstage Trump. But that's neither here nor there. I just find it amusing that even Eric Kripke is assuming that Trump won't be a factor in 2024 and DeSantis will just be the new Trump. I think you might be trying to will your preferred future into existence there, Eric. I don't think that's what's going to go down.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What we find fascinating about the question we're asking about Butcher is he self-aware enough to realize that he's causing his own misfortune? Is he self-aware enough to actually see if he can change? There are some of the interesting conversations we're starting to have for season 4 be concluded.
Mm.
I got nothing to say. It works.
Yeah, no. Go on.
Kripke has made it the same for Republicans, especially those supporting President Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement well known. During the acceptance speech at the 2022 Saturn Awards, Kripke said, "The message of the boys is in the real world. Anyone who stands in front of you and says they're here to save you is fucking lying and trying to sell you something."
Again, Eric, I'm glad that your talent seems to be outstripping your own thought here, because again, I think what you were going for by making making Homelander Trump in season 3 of The Boys was trying to transplant some of the negative qualities of Homelander onto people's opinion of Trump. But in a lot of ways, you just flipped it the other direction. You just transplanted some of the positive qualities people associate with Trump onto Homelander, which honestly I think makes Homelander a more interesting character than he was in season 2 or season 1. But that's neither here nor there. I just think it's funny that because of your own talent as a writer, you actually seem to have undermined yourself by writing something more three-dimensional and interesting than your own personal thoughts. Which, I mean, good for you. We need more of that. For the love of God, please give me writers who are pieces of shit, but who at least have enough talent to cover it, even from themselves. Give me writers who are so talented at writing that they even manage to outsmart themselves sometime. We need more of those, please.
You know?
Yep.
Okay. Ironically, he then added, "We all have responsibility to save each other, taking care of the people next to you in 1,000 boring, unremarkable moments every day, and that is how the world gets saved."
The echo kind of distorted your voice there. I didn't catch any of that.
Ironically, he then added, "We all have responsibility to save each other, taking care of the people next to you in 1,000 boring, unremarkable moments every day, and that is how the world gets saved."
No, Eric. Actually, the world can be interesting. The world can be meaningful. The world can be um high octane. The world can be high energy. That's the bullshit. That's the thing that that establishment minded people like you need to get the fuck over. Yes, most of your lifetime, politics was this stately, boring thing that the establishment did basically with little or no input from actual people. And that was, my decorum and my tradition and my this and my that and my the other. But it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be the way of, well, the most boring, most stuffy, most elitist prick ultimately is the good guy and wins out. Yeah, no. Between 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 the between the 90s and now, all you writers seem to have forgotten what it was like to be the underdog. You seem to have forgotten what it's like to be the populist, libertarian, free speech loving, freedom of expression championing outsider. Well, just because you all got old and cynical and sold out to the establishment doesn't mean that the younger generation has followed you there. Doesn't mean that your position is the only rational position. Just like back in the day when you guys were telling the traditionalists, rightly in my opinion, to go fuck themselves, they got all pompous and harumphy and out of touch and establishmenty, and you mocked them for it, and you won the day. Well, guess what virtues are still going to win the day? The virtues of, broadly speaking, populist libertarian championing of freedom of expression, individuation, and freedom of speech. The part of the public that likes the punk movement and likes the goth movement and likes telling the traditionalists to go fuck themselves also have decided that they really don't like the social justice movement either, on the grounds that it's just as pompous, just as bureaucratic, just as elitist, and just as establishmenty as the TradCons ever were. Quite frankly, I would like to see the back of both of these out of touch, outdated, moralistic cunts, frankly. Putting it as bluntly as I possibly can. Moving on.
Okay. After giving a tribute to the boys, decreased production designer, Arv Gruel, he encouraged readers, please vote fuck MAGA and have a great night.
You do realize that at least 51% of your population is at least broadly in favor of MAGA stuff, right? Not to mention that even those of us that aren't even Republicans or on the right, but prioritize populism, libertarianism, freedom of expression, and humanism, don't like moralistic authoritarianism, no matter which side it comes from, and really hate the outdated, pompous, decorum above everything, elitist bullshit. We prefer a system guided by meritocracy, not elitism. And the fact that you can't differentiate between those two things, you can't differentiate between the stuffed shirt, Ben Stein-esque, decorum-loving bureaucracy and genuine meritocracy is exactly the fucking problem. It's exactly the same fucking problem that the TradCons had yesterday. Remember the totally cringy Christian rap that that one guy did back in the day? Remember Pat Robinson and the stupidity of the 700 Club? Remember Mazes and Monsters? Remember all that shit? Well, that's what you guys are doing in relation to the grassroots movement that likes Trump, or doesn't even like Trump, but considers him the best of a bad lot because he's at least in favor of, broadly, populism and libertarianism, unlike all the rest of you cunts. Oh yeah. I remember Pokemon being of the devil. I remember Pokemon song backwards is Hail Satan. I remember that. And I was not convinced then, and I am still largely not convinced by moralistic bullshit. Yeah. If your idea of fun, if your idea of morality is removing everything that's fun or makes people's lives happy and meaningful, then your morality can get fucked. I'd gladly be immoral in that case.
I'll be honest, I never got into Pokemon.
Yeah, no, I always liked Yu-Gi-Oh and Digimon better than Pokemon, but I still was aware of Pokemon, and yes, I was aware of the it's of the devil thing. Just like D&D, just like the goth movement, just like the punk movement, just like comics, just like basically anything and everything that anyone has ever found meaningful outside of the moral frame, like outside of the moral dimension, has been called of the devil somehow. And again, I just want to say to all the moralists out there, if you set your morality in opposition to everything that people like doing of their own free will, you're not gonna win. I don't care how much you try. If you make morality the opposite of meaningful and fun, you will lose. Because meaningful and fun matters more than moral if you absolutely need to dichotomize them. Here's a tip. Try not dichotomizing them. Try using try putting fun and meaning first and morality second sometimes. That usually tends to work a hell of a lot better. Not saying they need to be opposed, but if you make them oppositional to each other, fun and meaning wins, morality loses.
Right. Okay. Alright. Back in 2020, while speaking to Screen Rant, Cricket claimed white dudes standing next to you are the most dangerous people. Says the white guy. Okay.
Say that again?
Okay. Back in 2020, while speaking to Screen Rant, Kripke claimed white dudes standing next to you are the most dangerous people. He goes on. So let me. He said we were really interested in exploring the idea of authority figures getting the public really riled up with xenophobia and racism, but ultimately the most dangerous people are the white dudes standing next to you. We wanted to reflect that story, so the supervillains are, in a way, a misdirect.
Eric, people are individuals, not hive minds, for one. And for two, Homelander didn't use xenophobia at all. Like, when exactly did Homelander use xenophobia as part of his rhetoric? As I recall, in season 3, the main impetus was I'm sick of all of the pomp, circumstance, and pageantry, and I'm sick of lying to everyone and lying to myself. That was the crux of his big speech in the I think it was the Herogasm episode, and that was the main thing that people got behind him for. I guess you could say Stormfront did that in season 2, maybe, because, she was an actual, self-identifying Nazi and shit. But at the most, that just convinced Homelander that supers are better than non-supers. And again, I hate to burst you guys' bubble with regards to this whole using superheroes as allegories for racism thing. Your whole racial supremacy is stupid argument doesn't really work when the people in question are actually objectively superior in a bunch of ways. Like the whole reason why racial superiority makes no sense with humans is because while some races are better at some things than other factors, it's still on the same bell curve, i.e. they all ultimately even out, and there's no reason to meaningfully discriminate between races. But if you're talking about people with actual goddamn genetic powers of some description that make them categorically faster or stronger or what have you than ordinary humans, they don't function well as an allegory, do you see? That I hate having to make this point because but at the same time I also hate seeing them walk themselves right into this problem every time they try and do this. You can't do a racial superiority is bad, okay, argument when there are actual objective superiorities involved. Like, no one is going to argue that Homelander is not stronger than most humans in the boys' universe. No one is going to argue that he's not faster. The only thing that he is wrong about in his I am better speech, which falls soon after the I am sick of lying to you guys and myself speech, is the smarter. He's not necessarily smarter than anyone else, but he is faster and stronger and better, at least in a bunch of physiological ways. And there is no arguing that point. It's like saying that people who are 6'7" are better at basketball than people who are 5'6" is some kind of supremacist creed. Okay, yeah, maybe in the loosest possible definition of that word, but it's also true. Doesn't mean you can't have someone who's 5'6" really apply themselves and get either as good or maybe even better than some people who are 6'7". But by and large, physical objective reality is a thing. And on balance, people who are 6'7" are better at basketball than people who are 5'6". And I'm saying that as someone who is 5'4". And yet I have no problem admitting to that. Because some people have different skill sets. And that's fine. And some people are better in certain ways. And a lot of time that's counterbalanced by other ways. For example, as I just went over, Homelander doesn't have any mental superiority relative to other humans or even other supers. Hell, Mindstorm is probably the smartest character we've seen in the Boys universe simply because of the nature of his powers. But that doesn't mean that Mindstorm or Homelander is inherently better than each other. It means that when you compare super to super, they even out, which is why Homelander doesn't even mind sharing his superiority rhetoric with the other supers, because he doesn't dispute the fact that other people's superpowers are relatively on par with his own. But he does point this out when it comes to regular people, because he's not wrong when it comes to other people, when it comes to ordinary humans. And no, it doesn't mean he has the right to mistreat people who he's better than, but that doesn't change the fact that he is superior. It just changes the fact of how he should choose to act on that superiority, i.e., by being protective or being helpful, or simply just liking people for the qualities they display outside of physicality. Which I think if you explained that to Homelander, it would solve 90% of this problem. That and getting him some fucking therapy because he was traumatized as a child. And nobody ever seems to treat him as a human rather than just treating him as a living weapon or a celebrity. Moving on.
Okay, give me. It's still loading. But
Ahsoka, are your family of Scandinavian descent at all? Just out of curiosity, because that would explain some things. If you have a member of your family who's like 6'8", then I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Nordic blood in your veins.
we're on this one, and oh boy. For the record, Dome picked this one.
Yes, I am suffering just as much as everyone else. I suffer for you all because I love you, and also because this stupidity makes my brain hurt. And therefore I shall kill it with logical fire.
Okay, hold on. Oh, great. Everything. For some reason, I think we're gonna have to start going into archive now from now on.
Oh. Well, at the very least, that will result in no more clicks going to the actual site. So good.
Mm.
Since they monetize clicks.
Give me a second to get that up and running.
Yep. Please excuse these technical difficulties, folks. Brainstormer's computer is a potato.
No, it said I had to make a membership for the Mary Sue in order to read that article.
Oh, fuck that noise.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, we're not paying you honey badger demonizing sons of bitches. And no, I haven't forgiven you for that.
Okay. Alright. Alright. We good now? Alright. So yeah, this is from marysue.com, originally, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But the troubling implications of a faithful yet inclusive Harry Potter adaptation. Once Dream, Now a Nightmare. It's written by Alyssa Shotwell, published April 21st, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, was Hermione supposed to be? Huh. No, that.
No, she's not. She's not black in the books. They changed it for Cursed Child specifically to appease the SJWs, but because J.K. Rowling is now a heretic, that bothers them. Even so.
Mm. Sorry, taking a sip of water. It is like super hot out, and my throat got like really dry.
Yeah. Again, this is part of the reason I hate summer.
Uh,
And that was true even before I bound myself to the Winter Queen.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't think I'm gonna have much to say for this one either, just because I'm not the biggest fan of Harry Potter. Like I grew up with like the movies and stuff, even though like I never really watched them. They never interested me.
Yeah, you missed out on Pottermania. For a good solid 10 years around when I grew up, it was the biggest thing under the sun.
Um,
And it was followed shortly thereafter by Twilight Mania. And then Hunger Games became the thing du jour. And then mercifully it was the MCU. Thank God.
well, Percy Jackson was also good. I would. It is a shame Percy Jackson did not get as big as it could have, because that is honestly a great series of books.
I never read them. Although, funnily enough, the guy I had a crush on in high school really liked them.
Okay. As I'm writing this, there's an active genocide happening to transgender people, among other groups facing ongoing erasure. What the fuck?
Because they're not being represented in the media, that's tantamount to genociding them because it's
Okay,
genocide.
so I have
Because,
like two things to say off the
uh-huh.
bat writing. Um, one that I was obviously just goddamn stupid to say.
Yeah, it's yeah. Go ahead.
That is just the most. I'm sorry, like I'm so used to like Princess Weeks and even who's the other one? Heather. No, it wasn't. It wasn't Heather.
What the hell is her name?
We covered her a lot when we first started. I remember.
Oh, Rachel Leishman.
Thank you.
That's the one you're thinking of?
Yeah, I mean Princess Weeks, a little off kilter at times, but is at very most,
She at least thinks through her positions, even if I disagree with some of them.
but this is just blatant conjecture bullshit. Like
No, it's a moral framework. The idea of a given demographic is more important than the actual people of that demographic. So if you don't represent if you don't represent the ideal of something, then it effectively is tantamount to genociding the people within that demographic. What I find funny about the whole trans thing is it's two kinds of feminists arguing with each other. It's specifically the TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, and the intersectional feminists. Um, Meanwhile, they never even seem to consider the possibility of a non-feminist or anti-feminist framework. Lol.
okay. Um, I want to start with this because that's the main issue with Warner Brothers Discovery and others continuing the relationship with J.K. Rowling, one of the most high-profile transphobes in the world. A transphobe pouring their excessive loyalties into the organization's lobbying for the extermination of trans people. What the fuck are you on about?
Because J.K. Rowling does not agree that trans women are the same as biological women, that effectively, in these people's minds, makes her a transphobe. She did not say she hated trans people. She didn't say she didn't respect and support trans people. All she said was the category of trans woman is different from the category of biological woman. That is the only thing that started this whole heap of shit, and it's still not far enough for you people.
I think this is my. Moving
She
on.
doesn't hate trans people. All she said was that trans people of a given gender are not the same categorically as the people who are biologically of that sex or that gender. Which is true. Never mind all the man-hating shit that J.K. Rowling has ever said. The thing you guys take issue with is the trans thing. Anyway, moving on.
Okay. Okay. Even if you could ignore all that, there are still major red flags with the announcement of the Harry Potter TV reboot's commitment to a faithful adaptation that didn't just spring up out of nowhere after Rowling's Transphobia came out.
Again, she's not transphobic. She never said anything against transgender people. All she said was that trans women are not the same as biological women. She conceded that they were both kinds of women, but they were different kinds of women, which is perfectly fair enough as far as I'm concerned. Because if they weren't different kinds of women, why would there even be a modifier?
Moving on.
Yep, moving on. Go ahead.
Content warning discussion of sexual assault. Okay. For over 5 years, the Mercier writers, among others, have talked about several issues within Harry Potter that yielded a yikes with the slightest bit of reflection. However, the number one topic of discussion among those critical of Harry Potter reboot is the handling of race, other than why a Harry Potter reboot over stories people have wanted for years, like the Marauders. Regardless of the race of her actress, Hermione what has been the radicalized character most discussed since the reboot announcement.
Because Cursed Child randomly cast a black actress, therefore Hermione was always black somehow. Even though she is described as a little white girl with mousy brown hair in basically every book of the Harry Potter franchise.
Again, my whole stance on this thing would have been obviously is just cast an actress who is good to play that character.
And it's not even like they don't have, you know, racial representation, quote unquote, in the franchise. Cho Chang is Asian. Kingsley Shacklebolt is black. No one has ever cared, nor will they ever care. It's the same. The Harry Potter universe has the same problem for the SJWs as the Star Wars universe has. In a universe where aliens and people and beings of different species exist, why the fuck would you even begin to care about the races within the type of human being? Like in a world with centaurs and giants and werewolves and animagi and every other frickin' thing, why would you even begin to care about human as a distinction? Like the different kinds of human.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Okay. Uh, am I the only one that thinks she had a ghostwriter for the first like 4 books for Ahsoka?
There's that, and there's also the fact that she ripped off DC's books of magic written by Neil Gaiman hard. Like, I am 90% sure that there would have not been a Harry Potter if there was not a Tim Hunter first.
Okay. The characters change in a few ways though. Through it. Oh, hold on. Sorry, sorry, I missed the comment. In the first 4 books, there is drastic writing change among them, and characters change in a few ways through it. I mean, isn't that kind of the point of the series though?
No, she means changes in the writing style and
Oh,
and how the characters are like described.
okay.
I'm willing to chalk that up to her like developing as a writer. Granted, mind you, I'd never thought that she was particularly good at writing, but whatever. If I had my druthers, our generation would have gotten obsessed with Harry Dresden rather than Harry Potter, but I didn't get a vote. And yeah, there was a time between like the ages of 6 and 9 that I was obsessed with Harry Potter too, but Pottermania was inescapable. And that was before I really got into like other franchises and learned how you could write things better. And I think that's true of like 90% of the Harry Potter fan base. It just happened to be the first franchise that a lot of people got into.
Enough?
Yeah.
Okay. And as the gateway for Harry to learn about wizarding, white supremacy, Hermione is the marginalized person. Though we learn wizards have their own community slurs and blood hierarchy, something anti-vaxxers have astoundingly appropriate. What the fuck? There is so much stupid in just that.
Okay.
Fuck.
Okay. Fuck your allegories. Hermione, right, can still be a white European girl, even if she's a mudblood, because the existence of mudbloods was never a one-to-one parallel with races. What it was the idea of genetic purity and the idea that magic was some kind of genetic fluke that therefore needed to be protected. That doesn't relate necessarily to any of the other kinds of races, either in the Muggle world or in the Wizarding world. Also, I would point out that people are far more quote-unquote racist to non-human sapient beings than they are to mudbloods.
Oh, the whole thing in that. I remember where they don't really have a lot of. It's weird. Like it has potential, but
Yeah, mudblood is an in-universe thing, not an allegory. I really wish we could stop seeing allegories everywhere they aren't. Sometimes things make sense within in-universe logic. And yes, the logic can be applied to other things, but we have to keep in mind that it first and foremost applies to a mechanic in-universe. Because for some reason, magic is somehow genetic in the Harry Potter universe, because J.K. Rowling couldn't be arsed to make up a magic system. Or even explain what's so special about magical bloodlines. Like I would even accept the Nephilim thing as an explanation. Like maybe they were the descendants of humans that shacked up with angels back in the day. That would at least make some kind of sense. And I think Shadowrunners did that. But yeah, J.K. Rowling couldn't be arsed to think of a magic system, so it's just whatever the plot needs, and also genetic quality because reasons.
okay. Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Alright. Yes, there are over 10 characters of color in the series. However, Hermione's reception in the Wizarding world as a Muggle-born is the primary tool for J.K. Rowling's weak allegory on prejudice. As
It's
the
not.
most marginalized, hold on. As the most marginalized book, Hermione is understandably more upset when she learns about slavery in the Wizarding world.
Okay, it's not a goddamn allegory. It is something that exists in universe. In addition to other categories, if you absolutely insist on them being there. But I would remind you that in a world where there are other sapient non-human races like centaurs and werewolves and shit, um, there's absolutely no reason to discriminate based on race. The only reason they discriminate based on magical aptitude is because magic, again, for some reason, is genetic in this universe, or at least as far as we know, and therefore magical aptitude is something that can be discriminated upon. And again, I hate to pull this card so soon after I pulled it the last time, but in the universe of Harry Potter, discrimination based on magical aptitude at least makes some sense because magical aptitude allows you to actually do shit that humans can't do otherwise. Just like, to some degree, Magneto thinking that mutants are better than non-mutants makes some kind of sense because they can do shit that humans can't do. Like, there are actual physiological, or physiological/metaphysical things that wizards and witches can do in the Harry Potter franchise that muggles cannot do. Again, assuming there isn't some kind of learning component to magic, which I have headcanons about, but that's neither here nor there. But no, you don't need to add a visual representation of changing Hermione's race in order to drive whatever point you're trying to make home. She's not discriminated against um based on ordinary human racism because the wizarding world doesn't care about ordinary human racism. What it cares about is magical aptitude, because magical aptitude actually is a difference that makes sense. Like, okay, racism in the human world, as far as we know, is a distinction without a difference, i.e., there is no moral difference or worthwhileness difference between races of human beings. But if there is a particular kind of race who all of a sudden develops magic and or mutant powers that is categorically genetic, there would at least be a conversation, do you see? Because It'd be okay. It'd be like I'm trying to think of this. Like, okay, it'd be like if someone was born tomorrow with the powers of Superman, or a whole bunch of some, like maybe there was a genetic mutation in, I don't know, every third human in the next generation, where every third human in the next generation develops the powers of Superman. If that happened, we would actually have to have some kind of racial superiority conversation, because the powers of Superman are categorically superior to the human bell curve. Because that's the thing. All differences of human races, so far as we know, are within the bell curve. You might have people who are smarter than others, you might have people who are stronger than others, you might have people who are, you know, more artistically inclined than others, etc., etc. But they all eventually balance out somewhere in the bell curve, i.e., you might have someone who's physically weak but very smart, someone who is dumb but very strong, etc., etc. But with the kind of powers that you talk about when you talk about the X-Men, or the kinds of powers you talk about when you're talking about the wizards and witches in the Harry Potter universe, that is well and truly outside of the bell curve. That doesn't mean there's any moral superiority to the fact that they are qualitatively better than normal humans, but it is objectively true that they can do things that other humans cannot do. And if you are a particularly stupid, particularly evil wizard like Gellert Grindelwald or Tom Riddle, you start to wonder if there is a further hierarchy of magic based on the purity of the magical bloodline. This is very stupid, but it at least makes some kind of in-universe sense. But you don't care about in-universe sense because you're too busy pushing morality and politics. Moving on.
So I just took a look. This is a really long article, Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, like another half hour or so, and then we're gonna have to move on. I think.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, we need to talk about the House of Elves, especially if this series follows the path of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, and cast a black actress to play Hermione. While that was once something many fans enjoyed, the longer we had to think about it, about the implications for the rest of the story, the more unsettling it's gotten. Do I need to reread them?
No, I heard it. I just didn't have anything to say about it really.
Okay.
And I'm trying to read Ahsoka's comments. Um um uh, what generations? Um the entire thing is you just can't give birth to muggles, even if it's to parents that, yeah, the although when a magical family gives birth to a muggle, they're called squibs. Um
Well, I think we gotta keep going though. I don't mean to like cut you off so
yeah,
bad.
we have a lot of article to get through. And I wanted to talk about the House Elves thing for a while now. So let's talk about the House Elves thing.
I don't think we're finishing this article anytime soon. I'll be honest.
Oh, is it one of those that where they went on and on and on and on
Yep.
and wanted to hear themselves talk?
Yep.
Oh well, that's, yeah. Anyway, Moving on.
Spew. Other than being the brightest witch for her age, Hermione is best known in books for her dedication to the abo-
Abolition.
abolition of slavery. After learning about Winky's and important elf omitted from the film servitude, she searches the library for information. Upon discovering Hogwarts what runs on the enslavement of Winky, the abolition of the slave caste becomes a significant goal for her onwards. Hermione begins a society for the promotion of elfish warfare. Welfare, not welfare, sorry, or
Hmm.
dispute. Hermione's commitment to ending slavery throughout the books isn't an issue in itself, it's the reaction from everyone else to the characterization of the house elves themselves, where things go south.
Yes, because much like many activists in the modern day and age, she never actually asked her proposed benefactors if this is something they wanted. And we actually know that Dubby notwithstanding, because his master was abusive, elves actually prefer to exist in a state of servitude because they are edified by the relationship between them and their adopted families. Because basically house elves are brownies. The only exception is when the master is particularly cruel, like it was in the case of Lucius Malfoy and also Draco. Although I don't want to be as harsh on Draco because when one's dad is a dick, it's hard to escape that shadow. Anyway, moving on.
Uh, Nearly everyone mocks Hermione for caring. Her methods of activism are messy, but she's also a lone teenager. Rebuke of not just from fellow humans, nearly all house elves resent Hermione's views. Rowling writes all but Dobby as happy in their status as slaves. A creature wants to stay in the home of his master and serve the worthy members of the Black family. Winky was so upset with her freedom that it drove her to drink.
Yes, because the house elves actually prefer it this way. And based on the fact that they're based on brownies, we know in real world mythology that brownies, being the spirits of a given household, actually seek families to essentially engage in a symbiotic relationship with. And that is how the house elves are generally portrayed. It's a symbiotic relationship. Doesn't mean there aren't bad masters who take advantage of this and who therefore essentially break their house elves' minds, like Dobby. Um, but just like with modern day activism of various different descriptions, if you're claiming to work on the behalf of a given demographic, you probably should at least try to understand the mindsets and desires of the people you're claiming to speak on the behalf of or advocate for. Moving on.
Yeah. Um, Everyone gets upset when Hermione's activism goes from advocacy to action, as she attempts to free the elves at Queen Gryffindor's dormitory. If Harry Potter were a product of the 2010s, his classmates would call her SJW. The house elves stopped coming to clean the rooms, and her classmates blamed her. The only other person who works in slavery is a non-nautical Slytherin, Liz Tuttle. Neville, Ron, and Harry technically join Spew, but just to keep Hermione off their backs. While Dumbledore does employ and house two free house elves, Dobby and Winky, it doesn't erase the hundreds of enslaved elves under his watch for 40 years. To benevolent slave master revisionism for me. Jesus Christ.
Okay, for the love of God. Since we are now going here, allow me to drop some historical knowledge on everyone, because this is what I do. You do realize, okay, And by no means does this mean that the institution of slavery is therefore good. You do realize, however, that you were actually looked down upon if you mistreated your slaves, right? In the time that the British Isles and Europe and the Americas kept slavery, it was considered incredibly immoral of you to mistreat your slave. You were actually looked down upon for doing so. And there are plenty of people who never once mistreated their slaves ever. And the people who did were often shamed, especially when you consider that slaves were very, very expensive and were very, very difficult to upkeep because, they were humans and all. And so, even if there was not a moral or social component to shaming people who mistreated their slaves, which there was, there's simply the fact of it doesn't make sense for you to horribly mistreat a very expensive luxury item, which is what, even in the most dehumanizing terms, slaves were. So, yeah, no. There were far more benevolent slave masters than there were non-benevolent ones. Doesn't mean that slavery was therefore okay. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have done away with it, but it does mean that we need to stop treating slavery as though it and the mistreatment of people is necessarily the exact same fucking thing. Also, getting back to the actual point of the article, unlike you, isn't it interesting that as soon as certain house elves were freed, they went and sought employment? And very often, when Hermione would free the house elves that she would free, said house elves would essentially go to Dumbledore and ask, "Can I basically do my old job but for pay this time?" And he would oblige because Dumbledore is Dumbledore. So, again, it's in the nature of house elves to do this kind of work, just like it's in the nature of brownies, which are basically the basis for house elves, to do this kind of work. And by trying to advocate, air quotes, for them without ever actually caring what they wanted, Hermione is being a moralistic toff. Which, yes, does actually kind of make her a pro to SJW. If you want to do something for people that they don't want done for them, you are the asshole. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. This isn't a transatlantic parallel. This isn't a loose analogy I'm projecting. Yes, it is. Slave appears 11 times in the Goblet of Fire to use the introduction alone. Still, characters like Ron, Rowling, and voice common contemporary and historical excuses for slavery to defend this hierarchy. He and other nieces that elves are housed, fed, and mostly treated well, part of the family. Despite being inheritable like objects, Harry inherits creatures. House elves are part of the families they serve.
Okay, and in modern day anti-slavery, Western world that we have, if you were a rich enough asshole to have servants in your household, paid servants, mind you, if you are a rich enough asshole to have servants in your household and your parents die, you will inherit them, just like Bruce Wayne did with Alfred, to use another fictional example. That works regardless of whether the servant is being paid or not. And incidentally, during the times when slavery was most common in the West, which again doesn't make slavery at all okay, property and services were actually considered more valuable than money. i.e., free room and board, was considered a kind of payment. And in fact, there are many employment contracts that specify room and board and food and shelter as part of the payments, to the point that the monetary compensation is actually smaller because room and board are included. Moving on.
Sorry, stretch my legs real quick.
Okay.
I know you don't know what that feels like to have like your legs lock up when you're sitting too long, but it's annoying.
Oh no, I know perfectly well what that's like. It just never stops for me.
I guess lucky me then.
Hmm.
All right. House elves are supposedly predisposed to cater to those given full humanity and autonomy, even if it means hurting themselves, like Dobby did when he first came to warn Harry about the Chamber of Secrets. Their commitment to their masters is theorized as to why they speak in third person. They have no sense of self. House elves do not appear to even have elvish families or any semblance of culture, unlike other similar beings.
Because they're house elves who are based on the brownie of English and British and the folklore of the British Isles, which there are equivalents of in various different European cultures. There's the Divinay in Slavic folklore. There's the genus loci, or uh, domest the domestis in ancient Greece, etc., etc. Also, whoever said elves don't have a sense of self? You do know there's a difference between choosing to function in a way that you are naturalistically predisposed to and not having a sense of self, right? And yes, Dobby did have to hurt himself because Lucius was a terrible, terrible master. And incidentally, in every instance that we actually see someone who is familiar with the way houses are supposed to be treated being exposed to Dobby, they do exactly what people in history very often did when they found out people were mistreating their slaves, which is they were morally appalled by how Lucius treated Dobby, and therefore Ron and the other characters who in other instances defend house elves are happy that Dobby is free, and so is Dobby because he was mistreated by his master. However, 9 times out of 10, they don't get mistreated. And there is actually a magical contract on house elves whereby if they are not engaged in the kind of symbiotic relationship that house elves are bound to engage in, they feel unfulfilled. Moving on.
Right, okay. Hermione even lambasts historical revisionism and the downplaying of slavery in her favorite book. Unfortunately, this is as topical as it was when the book was published 23 years ago. In all of Hogwarts history, though, of course, that book's not entirely reliable. A revised history of Hogwarts would be a more accurate title, or a highly biased and selective history of Hogwarts, which glosses over the nastier aspects of the school. Not once in over 1,000 pages does Hogwarts history mention that we are all colluding in the oppression of 100 slaves. Page 233 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Again, stop associating slavery with oppression. Yes, oppression happened under slavery, but that doesn't mean that every slave master was jeering and tee-heeing about everything that ever they got away with their slave. I mean, hell, several slave masters in the course of the time when the European colonies and America had slavery, several slave masters fell in love with their slaves. And don't give me that shit about she can't consent because slave. Because several slave masters, again, went into great detail about how they were courting their slaves in those instances. And several slave masters, upon dying, left property to their slaves. And not to mention, just like with butlers and in the fictional case of Alfred and Bruce Wayne, a lot of the time, it was slaves who were put in charge of raising the master's children. Which, if they were so victimized and so oppressed by it, you would think they would sneak in, oh, by the way, master, when you're older, please let me go. And in some cases that happened, and in the majority of cases it didn't happen, because in a lot of cases, slaves had no reason to want out, necessarily, because they were being treated fine, they were being given free food, free room and board, and often quite a lot of authority in the households that they had. Also, again, slaves were often prized very highly, to the point that most households only had one or two, because they were such a fucking luxury. And so they were treated accordingly, which is why it was considered socially gauche if you ever mistreated your slave. Moving on.
Harry and Hermione feel uncomfortable with overt expressions of social hierarchy between wizards, muggles, and magical beings, especially after Voldemort returns. However, both stop short of actual change beyond the hunting of non-pure-blood wizards. Status quo returns following the defeat of Voldemort. Statues dramatically resembling the Theodore Roosevelt equestrian statue presumably returns.
What does that have to do with anything?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that. I don't know. Moving on.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading what Dragon Turtle said. To be fair, Dragon Turtle, for most of the time period in history when people had slaves, nobody had rights on paper or otherwise. So, like, that's a bit weird. Also, again, in a lot of cases, especially in Reconstructionist era, in a lot of cases when slavery was abolished, the freed slaves usually just went back to doing their old jobs for pay this time. Which, given that they were paid previously in room, board, and usually a certain level of leeway within the household, it's again, I'm not saying slavery was therefore good. We should definitely have gotten rid of it because the idea of owning another human being is stupid, but let's not act as though the past was this horror, this Boschian comedy of horrors. It was it was very common indeed for people to shame other people who mistreated their slaves, and equally common for people to literally fall in love with their slaves and conceive children with their slaves.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, moving on.
Mm-hmm.
They're shorter and mouse-like, but we know they are human enough not to be considered animals. For one, house elves do not have an entry in the 2001 companion book Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. That's unlike werewolves, centaurs, and mer people. All but one were beings hired on as teachers in two novels and one movie. And one mention of house elves in Fantastic Beasts where to find them is in a lot of author section here. FBWFT notes meets Scamander work worked in the office for house elf relocation for 2 years. I I don't know what that has to do with anything.
I don't really get it either, because that just goes to prove that people do care about the quality of life of house elves, because there's a field of house elf relocation, which means that either through everyone in their family, their symbiotic family dying, or through them getting freed, or otherwise, a lot of house elves don't know what to do with themselves when they are freed. And I don't want to be this asshole, but you made this parallel, so now we have to talk about it. Post emancipation, a lot of slaves really didn't know what to do with themselves. That's why a lot of them basically went back to doing their same jobs, this time with pay. And in a lot of cases, the only reason why slaves weren't rehired in their exact same position, this time with pay, by their previous owners, was because the owners couldn't afford it, which definitely does at least give some level of leeway or truth to the idea that the defense of slavery, even during the Civil War, was largely an economic one, i.e., how the hell are we supposed to do all this manufacturing without without labor that we don't have to pay in overt wages? Never mind. And again, pointing out that most slaves were at least offered room and board and some level of leeway within the household, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, most of the argument during the Civil War was an economic one. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have eventually abolished slavery, and it also doesn't mean that it probably wouldn't have happened regardless of the Civil War, which it probably would have, especially because the cotton gin was literally only about 20 years away. But it is worth noting that many people treated their slaves well and only didn't rehire them on a working man's wage because they couldn't afford to. And many, many people actually did just start paying their slaves, and it was fine.
Alright. Alright. Additionally, Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald canon, unfortunately, introduces half human, half house elf Irma Dugard. The existence of Dugard, the child of a Lestrange and enslaved house elf, means a high probability of a very hard, the hard R word, but I'm not going to say it on here because I don't like saying that word.
Yeah. Given that it's a Lestrange, you might have a point there, but if we are really going to take this real world parallel as far as we want, as far as you insist on us taking it,
Actually, hold on, Don. Let me finish the rest of the paragraph just so you have the full.
Okay.
Forced to obey, house elves cannot consent. This was a common and economically feasible occurrence in chattel slavery. While not overtly said, R happens, Voldemort's conception, or is implied across the latter Harry Potter books.
Again, while that definitely did happen, and it definitely was not okay in any sense of the word, there were also people, many, many more, many, many times more people who actually did fall in love with and court their slaves. Because, believe it or not, a lot of people outside of plantations, and even then the worst of the plantations, gave their slaves a lot of leeway. It was sort of a I own you on paper, but I still value you as a person situation. Because for a lot of slave quote unquote masters, The fact that they were nominally called the Master didn't really make much difference to how they treated the people under their employ. Doesn't therefore mean we shouldn't have gotten rid of slavery, because even owning a person on paper is bad, and there are people who do misuse that nominal authority, but just like most other things in history, you're trying to paint a one-dimensional oppressed blush, and in this case, transferring that brush onto another setting entirely. But nevertheless, your view of history is myopic, dull, and moralistically charged stupidity.
Well,
Mhm.
sorry. Common defense of Rowling making slavery palatable is that people think she's referring to real-world folklore creatures called brownies. Oh, known by various names across various isles, these elfish, goblin-like creatures work gleefully for humans in the middle of the night and wear rags. However, house elves, unlike brownies, are known to those who live in the house and have no autonomy. Rowling could have begun the construction of these creations as brownies, but drew from her own poor understanding of class and race to expand upon them. Sorry.
Um, Assuming that she was even doing that, which I don't know. Granted, J.K. Rowling is very, very feministy, so maybe she was going the oppressor-oppressed route, but I really don't think so, because she simultaneously allows a character like Dubby to exist and other house elves to exist. In a world where J.K. Rowling was trying for the race allegory, she probably would have sided with Hermione more. But in actuality, she seems to have understood, at least to some degree, that history is fucking complicated if she was trying to do an allegory at all and not just taking advantage of brownie lore, which she probably was doing. Because let's face it, J.K. Rowling doesn't think through her world building farther than a single sheet of paper. We still don't know where the magic gene comes from in the Harry Potter setting, or even if there is in fact a magic gene, and it's not the case of like anyone can learn magic, but the wizarding world has forgotten that a long time ago, and now they're basically thriving off of bloodline, like residual bloodline magic. Basically, to use D&D terms, I wonder how many of these quote unquote wizards and witches are what D&D would call sorcerers, and there's a possibility that muggles could actually learn magic if they put their mind to it. We'll never know though, because stupid statute of secrecy, and because J.K. Rowling doesn't give a fuck about world building. But that's a different conversation entirely.
um, Other uncountable and racial parallels include the illegality of house elves and goblins, wielding wands in real-world slave codes. It's not terrible that Rowling drew from history. However, what is terrible is that she constructed another layer of oppression that readers were supposed to not care enough about to resent all but one character for just shrugging off slavery. And she made the only person who was treated like a minority in an otherwise racially progressive society untouched by real world bigotry a joke for Kenny.
Maybe, writer of this Mary Sue article, Hermione was projecting her own feelings about being mistreated as a mudblood onto the house elves when the house elves felt no such damn thing. Just like an actual SJW. She doesn't care about the people she claims to be trying to help. She only claims that she only claims about the abstract morality of the issue. And Ahsoka, is it confirmed that Muggles in the past could learn magic? So that basically lends credence to my headcanon. Yay.
I'm just waiting for the next article to load because we're gonna stop there just because like it's a super long article for some fucking reason.
Okay, so yeah, that basically confirms my theory that the wizarding world of today is basically dilapidated, dilapidated on the grounds of convenience magic, just like just like that one race in Star Trek who lost all other technology because a god computer was taking care of them so well.
Muggles equals techno mages. Says Chrononaut.
No, Chrono, technomages are a different thing even in Harry Potter because you have enchanted objects like the invisibility dampener of the flying car and all the various different like enchanted objects that Dumbledore has, which I always wondered what they did because those were always my favorite scenes in the Harry Potter books when Harry would get called into Dumbledore's office and it would describe all these weird magical instruments that he had. I, but then again, I am a nerd, so that was probably inevitable.
Oh, so this is kind of the first time hearing about a reboot of the Harry Potter franchise
Yeah, no, HBO Max is making one.
series, right?
Yep,
Well, at least they'll expand on the lore a bit more, I guess.
that would work if there was lore, but unfortunately not because J.K. Rowling never really thought anything through. She just thought, "Wouldn't this be cool for the plot? I'm gonna have it."
Anyway, let's move on to our next thing. It's actually kind of short, somewhat. So,
Mhm.
Dawn sent me this. Queen Cleopatra director speaks out. What bothers you so much about a black Cleopatra? As written by Tina Goralpi. If I say the name wrong, I'm so sorry.
He's bad at even the whitest of names, folks. Don't feel bad.
That wasn't. Okay, I'm not even. Whatever. Oh, Jesus Christ. Sorry, I don't know. I got the hiccups like for a good second there. Yeah, and this was published April 21st, 2023. So, um, more likely that Cleopatra looked like our actor than Elizabeth Taylor ever did.
No.
There's a okay, so I don't know what the fuck this is all about.
Okay, so Netflix is making a documentary, and it's very specifically supposed to be a documentary about African queens, and one of them is going to be Cleopatra. But they casted Cleopatra with a black actress, even though she was Macedonian Greek, and
Really?
even even the modern day Egyptians got up in arms about it and started boycotting the series, and Netflix is trying to defend themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, last summer I was. Sorry.
The funny thing is, they were originally going to cast Gal Gadot as Cleopatra, um, and then this director decided that she wanted to make the casting of Cleopatra a political act.
All right. Last summer I was living in Venice Beach and had decided due to a friend's persistence to visit a fortune teller. Me, ever the skeptic, but game for a laugh, agreed to go along. What the fortune teller said made me roll my eyes. I'm not saying you're Cleopatra, but somehow you share her story and are connected. Less than a month later, I got a call from a production company calling Jada Pinkett Smith African Queen Queens and was subsequently hired to direct 4 episodes for a drama documentary on the life of the controversial leader. The joke was on me. Okay.
I mean, good for that tarot reader, I suppose. But yeah, it doesn't change the fact that you are abusing whatever connection between you and Cleopatra you do have.
I remember as a kid seeing Elizabeth Taylor play Cleopatra. I was captivated, but even then, I felt the image was not right. Was her skin really that white? With this new production, could I find the answers about Cleopatra's heritage and release her from the stranglehold that Hollywood has placed on her image?
Okay, again, at this point in Egyptian history, the people running Egypt were not ethnically Egyptian. It was a result of Alexander the Great's conquest of his empire. The people running Egypt at this time were specifically the line of Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander's advisors. Therefore, Cleopatra was ethnically a Macedonian Greek, and even if she interbred with ethnic Egyptians in the 800 years since her ancestor Ptolemy, the Egyptians were not black either. They were by and large Middle Eastern, just like most of their neighbors were, because they were from that part of the world. They are essentially in roughly the same ethnic group as the Babylonians and Sumerians and other groups mentioned in the Bible. Namely, even the majority of the Egyptians, like the ethnic Egyptians of like the pharaonic kind, were Middle Eastern in coloration. So even if she interbred with ethnic Egyptians, which we don't know that she did, and there's no reason to think that she did do, that would only give her roughly like olive colored skin, because she would still be majoritarily Macedonian Greek mixed with a little bit of Middle Eastern, which actually means that, frankly, Gal Gadot would have been perfect casting for Cleopatra, because she is Israeli and has some Greek and Italian ancestry. So yeah, that would actually be perfect.
She's also very beautiful, and because if I remember correctly, Cleopatra is described as
It's funny. Her beauty was exaggerated over the centuries because we actually have sculptures of her, and she wasn't that much of a looker. What people reacted to mostly, according to the writings that we have in her lifetime, was her um, high degree of elegance and her education. She could speak, I want to say it was 9 languages fluently. So yeah, most of the reputation of Cleopatra was more about her personality and intelligence than it was about her actual beauty. But nevertheless, I'm fine. I I think that Gal Gadot would be perfect for Cleopatra. Again, both for actually kind of representing pretty much exactly what Cleopatra's makeup would be, and also because she's beautiful, and also because she's a great actress.
22 languages in total.
Okay, thank you.
Impressive. That's impressive.
Yeah, thank you for fact checking. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you, Jennifer. Yeah, that is pretty impressive. In terms of fluency, it was at most half. Okay, well, yeah, that just makes sense. I mean,
well, but in any way, like most of us have a problem. Most of us have a problem being bilingual. I mean,
I can barely speak English.
Not to mention that he's of some semblance of Mexican descent, and he doesn't speak a word of Spanish.
I'm He's American. What the fuck do you want from me?
I just find it funny. and also Olay.
Alright, anyway, moving on.
Uh-huh. This is
Like,
probably the live stream that's gonna get me canceled someday if anyone sees it. I've basically rationalized genetic superiority and slavery twice in this live stream.
anyway.
Oh Lord.
Both in Iran, I am Persian, and Cleopatra's heritage has been attributed to, at one time or another to the Greeks, the Macedonians, and the Persians. The known facts are that her Macedonian Greek family, the Ptolemy,
Ptolemaic. The
Ptolemy,
P is silent.
right? Like her,
It's Ptolemy. Yeah.
Ptolemaic lineage
Yeah.
intermarried with West Asians, Seleucid?
Yeah.
Okay, Seleucid dynasty and had been in Egypt for 300 years. Cleopatra was 8 generations away from these Ptolemaic ancestors, making the chance of her being white somewhat unlikely.
Okay, but again, even if we factor in the fact that she might have interbred with Egyptians or West Asians or what have you, that only means that she would have some Middle Eastern in her. And given that at that time the Greeks and Italians were fairly dark skinned, you could at least make some kind of argument there. But that basically would result in her having basically the same kind of olive colored skin as surprise Gal Gadot. Which again, I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of amazed at the sort of world-rending irony of this, that you basically had someone who both ethnically and skill-wise would have been perfect for Cleopatra in the form of Gal Gadot, and you recast her because she wasn't black enough, even though Cleopatra was not black. Also, most people in Africa are also not black. Only South Africans are black. Only sub-Saharan Africans are black.
Mm.
Because they developed melanin in their skin because they were exposed to the sun a lot more, being as they had to deal with the Sahara Desert often. North Africans and East Africans are not black.
After 300 years, surely we can safely say Cleopatra was Egyptian. She has no more Greek or Macedonian than Rita Wilson or Jennifer Aniston. Both are one generation from Greece.
Okay, but even so, even if she was pure-blooded Egyptian, which she wasn't, that would only make her look Middle Eastern. Because, broadly speaking, the people of Pharaonic Egypt were cut of the same rough genetic cloth as the Sumerians and Babylonians and the other people of Middle Eastern and Abrahamic extraction. So she would have, even if she was pure-blooded Egyptian, which she wasn't, she would look more like a modern-day person from Pakistan or Israel, Gal Gadot, than she would a sub-Saharan African. Your ignorance of how the ethnic breakdowns of Africa and the Middle East works is kind of in and of itself a little bit racist, because your assumption is that African queens means black queens necessarily. It ain't so.
Okay. Sorry, clean my glasses real quick. Okay, moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the research, I realized what a political act it would be to see Cleopatra portrayed by a black actress. Okay, here we go. For me, the idea that people had gotten it so incredibly wrong before, historically, from Frida Barra to Monica Bellucci, recently with Angelina Jolie and Gal Gadot in the running to play her, meant we had to get it even more right. The hunt went on to find the right performer to bring Cleopatra into the 21st century.
She doesn't belong in the 21st century. She belongs in Alexandria in Egypt, where she was. You know, like, as in the person actually existed in that time period. Also, if your politics can't abide some semblance of logic or reality, then it can get fucked, frankly. She was Macedonian Greek and maybe at a stretch with a little bit of Middle Eastern in her, which would have resulted in her having dark olive toned skin, very similar to someone like Gal Gadot. I love the irony of they basically had the perfect person to play her, and they recasted her because she wasn't black enough, even though the person in question she was playing in a documentary wasn't black. And that's the other thing. If this was a fantasy movie, or um if this was some kind of historical fiction, that would be one thing. But it's supposed to be a documentary, so there's a higher standard to some kind of accuracy. Yeah, no documentary gets it 100% right 100% of the time. But shouldn't you at least make the attempts rather than muddying up actual documentable history with politics and morality? That that'd be like if this movie that'd be like if this series was made in Nazi Germany and she was played by someone from Norway. That'd be a bit much, wouldn't it?
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Why shouldn't Cleopatra be a melanated sister? Oh my god.
Because people from that part of Africa aren't black.
I'm sorry, it's just the fact that you're willing to write that in an official article. I mean, granted, it's variety, but still.
Yeah, no, this is her official response to people criticizing her for this. Yeah, but yeah, it's because she wasn't, and because we know she wasn't, because at the very most she would resemble roughly the same people who are in Egypt today, or the people we know were in Sumer and Sumeria, or the people depicted on fricking Egyptian art, i.e., the way that Egyptians depicted themselves as roughly Middle Eastern in coloration. But even then, we know that she had quite a lot of ancestry um from Macedonian Greek extraction, and at this point in Egyptian history, Egypt wasn't even ruled over by the pharaonic dynasty anymore because Alexander came in and did his Alexander thing.
Enough.
Yeah, moving on.
And why do some people need Cleopatra to be white? The proximity to whiteness seems to give her value, and for some Egyptians it seems to really matter.
Because this is their fucking history. No matter how much, Muslimization has happened in Egypt in the last couple hundred years, that doesn't change the fact that they're still proud to be the place that the pyramids come from, and the place that figures in so much of history and mythology. And you know what? I don't fucking blame them, because frankly, and I'm gonna level with you, like, when I first started studying magic, and I was first drawn to a polytheistic pantheon, it was the Egyptian pantheon I was drawn to, because frankly, Egypt has some of the coolest history and the coolest magic it's possible for a civilization to have. And they're one of the greatest civilizations to have ever existed on this planet. The pyramids are still fucking standing after 5,000 years. That counts for something. Considering that if you ever watched the History Channel show Life After People, which is an actual attempt at something resembling a documentary, most of modern civilization would be gone after 300 years of not being attended to, and the pyramids would still be fucking here for the next 10,000 years or so, at least. But yeah, they care because it's their actual history, and they care because it's ahistorical, and they care because some of them probably still have ancestry from Cleopatra, and they're not fucking black. So yeah, I don't blame them. Moving on.
Okay. After much hand-wringing and countless auditions, we found in Adele James an actress who conveyed not only Cleopatra's beauty, but also her strength. What the historians can confirm is that it is more likely that Cleopatra looks like Adele than Elizabeth Taylor ever did. As Judge got nearer, I realized the magnitude and political nature of this job. It was important to get things right, but also find a way of telling the story with humanism and nuance. The last thing we needed was another Cleopatra divorced from her womanhood and her power only sexualized.
Oh, fuck you. Feminism does not speak for all womankind, nor does intersectionality speak for all black people kind, nor was Cleopatra ever black. Also, Ahsoka, I'm gonna need a source for that because, as far as I know, there is evidence that the Sphinx was created by a pre-Egyptian dynasty, but the pyramids were created by Khufra. God damn it, Khufu, Khafra, and I forget the third one. But we actually know roughly the time that the three pyramids at Giza were built. We also know roughly when the Step Pyramid was built. We do not, however, have an actual date for the Sphinx, unless there has been some new development in this area that I'm not familiar with, which is entirely possible. Unless there is some new development that suggests the pyramids predate Khufu and his sons, then I doubt that. We do, however, know that the Sphinx was probably built by a pre-Egyptian civilization, and that said Sphinx was actually a lion first, and that Khafra edited the Sphinx and put his head on. Oh, the oldest pyramid. So that you mean the Step Pyramid? Because we know roughly when the Step Pyramid was built, even if it doesn't have a body in it. And the Sphinx, as far as we know, was never meant to contain a body in the first place. If you believe Edgar Cayce and some of the recent archaeological radar mapping, there might actually be a library underneath the Sphinx. Which, score one for Edgar Cayce, picking that information out of the Akashic record a century ago. Yay, good for him.
The biggest one, not the oldest one. The Great Pyramid of Giza.
Yeah, but there's no reason to believe that it didn't at one point have Khufu's body in it. It was just probably grave robbed. Because I know the Sphinx is older than what we know of the Egyptian civilization, but I have seen no evidence as yet about the pyramids following suit. We know not only do we know when the pyramids were roughly built, we know the dynasty of kings that actually built them. So there's that. Again, unless there's been some new revelation in carbon dating or something that I'm not familiar with.
As much as I love to hear that, like, I don't mean to be that guy, but we do have kind of a time limit here. So if you guys
Yep.
actually see this like conversation, it's just like maybe again the Discord or anything.
Yeah. Moving on though.
The HBO series Rome portrayed one of the most intelligent, sophisticated, and powerful women powerful women in the world as a sleazy, dissipated drug addict, yet Egypt didn't seem to mind. Where was the outrage then? But portraying her as black, well,
Okay, because there is a certain threshold of changes that is reasonable and a certain threshold of changes that is not reasonable, especially when you, in your own words, are doing this as a political act. Also, there is a different there is a different there is a different set of standards that gets applied to a documentary than to a piece of historical fiction or fantasy fiction. If you wanted to portray Cleopatra as black in something like Gods of Egypt, that would have been one thing. But you are attempting to pass this bullshit off as a documentary, and you admitted straight out that you have a political and moral bias that prevents you from wanting to portray history as it was actually presented, documentably presented. Like, and that's the other thing. If you wanted to play this game with someone like Hatshepsut, one of the earlier actually pharaonic female pharaohs, you could almost probably get away with it. Or if you did it with Nefertiti, you could almost probably get away with it. But we actually have a lot of documentation around Cleopatra's life, because Cleopatra's life was actually fairly recent as far as these things go. Like, we know roughly when she was associated or when she was situated in history, and we also know the people she actually interacted with. You know, that whole love triangle between her, Caesar, and Mark Antony thing wasn't just in Shakespeare. It actually happened, at least in some version, or at least in some form. So we know roughly what she did in her life, and we know when she traveled to other countries diplomatically, because she did throughout her life actually go to several other places in the empire for diplomatic reasons. And there were statues and paintings and wall carvings made of her, which we still have a lot of.
moving on.
Moving on.
Perhaps it's not just that I've directly received the portrays Cleopatra as black, but I have asked Egyptians to see themselves as Africans, and they are furious at me for that. I'm okay with this. Hold on,
After,
hold on. While shooting, I became the target of a huge online hate campaign. Egyptians accused me of blackwashing and stealing their history. Some threatened to ruin my career, which I wanted to tell them was laughable. I was ruining it very well for myself, thank you very much. No amount of reasoning or reminder that Arab invasions had not yet occurred in Cleopatra's age seemed to stem the tide of ridiculous comments. Amir in his bedroom in Cairo wrote to me to earnestly appeal that Cleopatra was Greek. Oh Lord, why would that be a good thing for you, Amir? You're Egyptian.
okay, but again, the Egyptians, the pharaonic Egyptians, as far as any evidence that we have can tell, would have looked similar to the Babylonians and the Sumerians, which were not black, they were Middle Eastern. Basically, pick out a Middle Eastern country or a quote unquote biblical country if you want to go there. I hate using that term, but that's the best way. That's the best way I could put. Like, okay, the ethnic groups you're talking about are the groups that existed between the Mediterranean and the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, or the Cradle of Civilization, as it was once called. So basically, you're talking about the Mediterranean, and you're talking about what was once called Mesopotamia. Those are the two groups that Egypt is situated smack bang between. So there is no reason to believe that there was some migration of sub-Saharan Africans down through the Sahara into where they are now, and that they were once Egyptians. There is none. Yet, no point, no reason, documentation, or even rationale to explain why the Egyptians would be sub-Saharan Africans. What they would be is situated somewhere ethnically between people of the Mediterranean and people of what was once called Mesopotamia, which includes places like Sumer, Babylon, and the places that were referenced between Tigris and Euphrates in the Bible and other Middle Eastern civilizations. If you want to take issue with that, you are going to have to take issue with a lot of history. And here's the other thing, my dear. You do realize that just because you see races and demographics as some kind of hive mind doesn't mean that everyone else does. People in Egypt now can be proud of being Egyptian and can even like the legacy of the ancient Egyptians, even if there was some kind of Arabic migration into Egypt, which, by the way, ethnically speaking, there probably wasn't all that much difference between the Arabs and the pharaonic Egyptians because of where they are geographically situated, as I just went over, between what is called the Mediterranean and what was once called Mesopotamia. Which again would have made Gal Gadot a perfect casting for her, but never mind. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. All right. So was Cleopatra black? We don't know for sure, but we can be certain she wasn't white like Elizabeth Taylor. We need to have a conversation with ourselves about our colorism and the internalized white supremacy that Hollywood has indoctrinated us with. What the fuck? Did people ever hear themselves talk?
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. Okay, she probably wouldn't have looked like Elizabeth Taylor, you're right. But one thing we can be reasonably sure is that she probably looked at least a little bit like Gal Gadot. Because Gal Gadot has ancestry in the Mediterranean and ancestry in what is now Israel, which is right next to Pakistan and the other Middle Eastern countries, which is not that far away from Egypt. So, as far as actors go, if you really want to go this, closest ethnic parallel thing, which we shouldn't do and it's stupid to do, but if you want to go this ethnic parallel thing, you probably couldn't find a better one than Gal Gadot, frankly. Part Mediterranean, part Mesopotamian. Perfect. Hadoy. But why let a silly little thing like meritocracy, equality, or actual historicity get in the way of your socio-political and moral gobbledygook? And one thing you can say with some degree of certainty is while we might not know she wasn't black, as in we don't have some way of cloning her and finding out, there is no historical evidence that even remotely points to the fact that she was black, and a quite damning amount of things that suggest that she was either dark-skinned Greek or Middle Eastern, which would have led to, throughout the course of the 300 years or so of the Alexandrian occupation of Egypt and the Ptolemaic occupation of Egypt, probably would have led to her having roughly olive-toned skin, if nothing else. So even though she's not white, she sure as shit isn't black or Asian, dude. She's Middle Eastern, probably with quite a lot of Greek holdovers, because she was from Macedon, family line wise.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on.
Okay. Most of all, we need to realize that Cleopatra's story is less about her than it is about who we are.
Read that again. I didn't hear any of that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Most of all, we need to realize that Cleopatra's story is less about her than it is about who we are. It's almost, hold on.
Go ahead.
It's almost as if we don't realize that misogynoir still has an effect on us today. We need to liberate our imaginations and boldly create a world in which we can explore our historical figures without fearing the complexity that comes with their depiction.
Okay, misogyny, irrespective of whether it's Blanc or Noir or any other fucking thing, misogyny is a vanishingly rare mental disorder that only afflicts those with severe mental trauma or extremely abnormal genetic defect. So I don't even allow that misogyny is a large enough force in the universe to actually meaningfully exist on a large scale, let alone misogynoir. And yeah, no, I'm sorry, but the events that occur in someone's life is far more about them than it is about people who won't live for another 3,000 years. Deal with it. You don't have the right to someone else's life story. You don't have the right to say that that the audience is more important than the character when it comes to historical figures. Quite frankly, I wouldn't even let you say the audience is more important than the character when it comes to fictional figures. But you sure as shit don't get to do it with people who are actually flesh and blood. And the sheer apocalyptic arrogance of you to say something to the effect of this person's story isn't about them even though they lived it, it's about me 3,000 years after the fact is frankly cartoonishly stupid. Moving on.
Okay, we're almost done. So, I am proud to stand with Queen Cleopatra, a reimagined Cleopatra, and with the team that made this. We reimagined a world over 2,000 years ago where once there was an exceptional woman who ruled. I would like to draw a direct line from her to the women in Egypt who rose up in the Arab uprisings and to my present sisters who are today rebelling against a brutal regime. Never before has it been more important to have women leaders, white or black.
No, Cleopatra was an exceptional individual woman. She didn't have some kind of spiritual connection between herself and all womankind. And what's more, I'm fairly certain, based on what we know of her, that she wouldn't want it either. She would have wanted to have been known and respected and admired for her own personal achievements as an individual woman. And even then, I bet she would want to be acknowledged as an individual person more so than a woman because she actually managed to have most of the significant men of her age wrapped around her little finger. And I'm betting she would certainly want to have had that ability of hers to wrap said men around her little finger acknowledged. She wouldn't want to have been viewed as just an exceptional woman. She would have wanted to have been viewed as an exceptional person, which she was. But no, there's no revolutionary connection between you and her because Cleopatra wasn't trying to create a revolution. She was a monarch, you idiot. She was a monarch, and here's the part that's really going to be cooking your melon in a minute. If you really want to turn Cleopatra into, put her through the modern day grift mill, wasn't she a colonizer? Didn't the didn't the Alexandrian and Ptolemaic Greeks colonize what was previously pharaonic Egypt? Oh my! How queer you seem to have gone quiet.
Right. So that was it for that article. Now we get to move on to some positive things.
Mhm.
Give me a second. So,
And by the way, I'm not saying that her being a colonizer is a bad thing. By the way, I'm just saying that it's funny to me that that they want to claim a member of the Ptolemaic and Alexandrian dynasty that colonized Egypt, and yet every other time in every other instance of colonization, they automatically go get the colonizer out of the position, derp.
okay, give me a second. So, also a lot about sweet potatoes this time.
Mhm.
Anyway, just so somewhat end off on something more positive. Dawn and I will be reviewing the first couple episodes to come out. Um,
Uh-huh.
and,
Before we get there, I want to address something that Dragon Turtle said. The reason I don't call her a pharaoh Dragon Turtle is specifically because the Alexandrian and Ptolemaic dynasties did essentially colonize Egypt. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing or anything. I'm just saying that basically puts her out of running for being called a pharaoh. A lot of people consider her the last pharaoh, but frankly, I would stop counting the quote unquote pharaohs as pharaohs when Alexander and company showed up.
anyway, um, yeah. So Dawn and I are going to be reviewing the first couple episodes that came out last night or
Mhm.
early this morning.
Mind you, I've only seen one of the episodes because Brainstormer had to remind me that we were doing this today.
Yeah. Um, yeah, this is Ginny Tartakovsky's newest animated project, and yes, it's okay. It is on Adult Swim, which I think kind of helps, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's a shame we can't get these kind of cartoons on actual Cartoon Network anymore, but que sera, sera, I suppose.
to be fair, I think it just kind of helps with like the mood and setting. Because I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, early like there are cartoons that can be like on child centric or like networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can push the limit. You know, obviously like Avatar, Samurai Jack, Teen Titans, and stuff like that. But
Man of action, cartoons, gargoyles, etc.
yeah, but I feel like this specifically because given the story that is being presented, and we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if nothing else, this show kind of comes across more as like a teen show than like uh, a regular Adult Swim show.
Yeah, I kind of wish we could see this kind of action cartoon make a comeback on the main network.
Yeah. Although I will say, I think it's better. I find it funny because I don't think it's going for that like super hard like adult cartoon like so many adult cartoons go.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, Unicorn Wars Eternal. Basic plot from this is that three warriors from ancient times are being constantly reincarnated throughout time to face this great evil that is coming, that comes every now and then, like every generation.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're following one of the current, well, I say current, but it is set in 1890. Like
Yep.
Victorian,
It's set in Victorian London. Yay, my favorite.
and it's like and I do want to mention, this is like a very heightened version of that because just given the art style and how everything looks. Like it had just,
There's a lot of steampunk technology going on here.
which I'm not complaining about because steampunk is fucking cool and it needs to be put into more things.
I just wish they explained it a little bit more because like when the guys who were digging and found the giant robots uh pulled out a drilling tool, I was like, wait, they wouldn't have had those in Victorian London. What the hell?
Well, I mean, time travel is a thing here apparently. So
I know, but it's still like if you're gonna pull out like it'd be different if like the main characters had access to this kind of technology, but this was just one of those a random side character who was doing a working class job had a piece of technology that was anachronistic for the time. My brain momentarily went, "What?"
Who's Turkey Tom?
Um, I'm just trying to figure out who the why that's being brought up.
Ask him why the girl's face looks like Turkey Tom.
Um, does it?
I don't know who that is, and I don't really see that. So
I don't know. I don't see it either. What do you, I guess you're kind of alone on this one. It's okay.
um, but yeah, it's very. I mean, it's very much a Gendy Tartakovsky story, given that there really isn't a lot of dialogue, and it is mostly action, which I think is good, and it conveys a lot of things.
I almost wish there was a little bit more exposition because the first episode was a little bit confusing.
You're not paying attention.
Like I get the I was more for a minute there I was more interested in the wedding drama than I was in the reincarnation thing. And
That
then
is
when the giant robot showed up, I was just kind of like, okay, I guess we're doing this now.
that's weird that you were interested in the wedding thing.
Like I assumed that the Warriors Eternal would have come in some other way. I didn't expect for one of the people getting married to wind up being one. So kudos to you, Gendy. You got me. I didn't see that coming.
Right. But it's really enjoyable, and I just dig how it's very much an evolution, like the art style and the animation. It's very much an evolution of Gendy Tartakovsky's style, and I think with because here's the thing, it is one of the best looking cartoons I have seen in like a decade.
Well, yeah. Again, it's a return to the kind of action cartoons we used to get in the '90s and 2000s. Would that we had more of them.
Right. Although I will say it is again, like I said earlier, it's very much kind of a toned down version. Like it's not overly edgy or anything or violent. Um, it's not like Guinea Tartakovsky's other Adult Swim show, Primal, which is basically just like Conan the
And even
Barbarian.
that, you mostly could have gotten away with, probably, on the main network, if you toned it down just a tiny bit.
Yeah,
I miss the days when I miss the days when we treated kids like they actually had a mind of their own.
yeah. Giant Troll. It's made by the same guy who made Samurai Jack and Primal.
And Dexter's Lab a whole and Hotel Transylvania and a whole bunch of other things. Unsurprisingly, Gendy made a good thing.
Yeah.
Surprising literally no one. Gendy is awesome.
There's also something like that was very noticeable to me that I'm kind of like trying to think about like other Kenny Tarkovsky things. The music in here was really good too. Like I'd say better than a lot of other series he's done.
I'd call it about the same. Then again, it's been a while since I've revisited anything Gendy did
No,
except for
besides
Dexter.
like the other things besides the main themes, uh, those shows I can only remember like the main themes, right?
Hmm.
But with this, I kind of get it stuck in my head of like the stuff in the show, like the actual soundtrack of the show, like in the episode.
I think it's just that he has more freedom here because it is on Adult Swim. I think maybe some of his other shows were going to go more dark, and he toned it down a little bit because it was Cartoon Network
Yeah,
mostly that he's worked with.
but yeah, I will say like the first two episodes. Here's the thing. I don't know. I'm on the fence about this because it is kind of a thing. But the first two episodes are very. It's a very fast pace. I will say. I think you and I can both agree to that, even though you've only seen the first episode.
I yeah, I can't speak to anything that happened in the second episode. I can only speak to the first episode because the first episode was posted for free on the Adult Swim's YouTube channel. But yeah, I it was very fast paced, even to the point that I almost wanted it to slow the fuck down and deliver the necessary exposition. Damn it!
Well, they might do the extension later, as the series, as like maybe next episode or something. But
But
um,
you know me, I get into worlds and lore, so it's like I wanted it was like stop moving and tell me what the fuck's going on here, guys. Come on.
I mean, to be fair, that's just a given with a Tartakovsky anime. Oh, right, and he also did the 2003 Clone Wars animation.
Yeah, he did the original Clone Wars show. Yeah, again, Gendy very rarely, if ever, makes a bad thing. The only thing of his that I would qualify as possibly bad are the later season of the later seasons of Dexter after the voice actor was changed and the art style was altered, and also the Hotel Transylvania movies. Although the Hotel Transylvania movies I blame mostly on um Adam Sandler and Happy Madison than I do Gendy. In fact, I'm almost sure that everything that was good about Hotel Transylvania was because of Gendy.
Right. Um, but yeah, it's I would still say this is a show you really should watch if you're a fan of Jimmy Tartakovsky, just because it is engaging and it makes you want to watch more. You know,
I would advise maybe waiting until a couple more episodes have come out though, because I was lost and I almost never get lost. So that might speak to your ability to. I mean, I guess if you don't really care about the exposition and you just want to get from one action scene to another, that's one thing. But like I need the necessary exposition before I can return to this franchise.
right? Again, it's the first few episodes, so they are still setting things up. Honestly, I kind of wish they did like maybe like a special, maybe like 1 hour and a half
Mm.
uh, thing, like a pilot movie.
Yeah.
Maybe that could have helped better.
Mm.
But overall, like it's still an enjoyable watch, I'd say. If minus the certain gripes we have mentioned.
Like I say, I just don't know what's going on, and it confuses me. Like, I get the constantly reincarnating warriors thing because that was the only thing they bothered to explain. But like, I need more. I need more context.
Right. Um, I think we both agree though. It's fun though. It is still
It's
fun.
it again. It makes me feel good just because it's a return to the classic like action cartoon molds that
Yeah.
we grew up with in a golden age of cartoons.
Although, well, I assume the first season is done by now, given that it was announced what 2 years ago.
Yeah, I assume if they're airing it, then at least the first season is done, or at least the first half season.
Just given like the writer's strike that just happened, you know.
Yeah, so I assume we'll probably be waiting a while to get a season two, but I wouldn't think that that would impact this at all.
Yeah.
And most of the writers that end up getting got by the writer's strike are probably going to be the bad ones, so sucks to be them, but good for everyone else, I suppose.
Yeah. Um. Anyway, yeah. I wasn't really disappointed. Just again, just want more, right? I guess basically you could say it.
My best way of putting it is gives me exposition. Gives the exposition.
Anyway, that is all we have for this week, folks. So with that, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidase, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Gendy shall give me exposition or fuck off.